group of people I have most in common with in this room versus not. And you realize how the South has always been very culturally, very integrated as far as like how we look at, like I said, how we talk, how we sound. Our housing has African roots. My shrimp and grits is Senegalese.
Absolutely.
My music is a combination of, Irish work ballads and West African work songs.
And that's funny that you said that, because we always get so hung up on the idea of race.
Yeah.
And we always see it as skin color, but
right.
Most people don't understand that race really has nothing to do with skin color. It's about cultures and subcultures. Yeah. And once they understand that, I think they'll be free.
Well, once
we are one species with many races, but
I mean, if I'm of redneck Northern Irish Scotch Presbyterian ancestry, which I am, right? And I realize that Biafra Nigerian culture is very similar to the Scotch Irish. I mean, they're almost the same people if you look at like what they're known for. Like,
right.
Basically, two groups of people who can't be controlled, who are rebellious, and are so integrated in their DNA. I mean, even blending together.
Right.
And but this whole, of course our music's the same. Of course we're eating the same food. It's actually a funny thing. The ironic thing is in the northern states, people are more culturally segregated. I get those white-black jokes that comedians make because I'm like, yeah, of course people in North Dakota don't season their food. I get it. It's because they're German, right? The Germans don't season food.
Right.
But you're not going to be from New Orleans, no matter what your color is, and not we're going to put some spices on things.
Oh, exactly.
And it's so funny because I have a lot of relatives in Pennsylvania, and I have nothing in common with them. I'm like, they're serving me ham. I'm like, what is this? There's no salt on it. There's not. It's like, everything is very bland. Good desserts. They're really good at that. But you can see it's very German, right? It's very different than what I'm used to.
What was your first impression of Jamestown when you first came here, as compared to now?
As a kid?
As compared to now?
Yeah, boring. At the time, they didn't know where the fort was. At the time, it was mainly statues from 1907.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of statues did they have here? Just the...
Well, these were all put up at the same time all the Confederate statues were being put up for the same reason, because...
That's a whole other story.
But it's a similar story, because what
right.
it is the same people putting those up. So we didn't really lose the war to the North, or they cheated is really the way to say it. Remember that Plymouth, Massachusetts was a more popular story than Jamestown, even though we're 13 years older. And so this is the whole, Massachusetts isn't first, we're first. This is an obelisk 104 feet tall to symbolize the 104 Englishmen and boys. The replica church is 1907. The ticketing gate there was 1907. The John Smith statue is from 1907. And so I'm here in 1990, I think, when I was in 6th grade. And, I got told how important Jamestown was growing up here. But we got to the field trip, and they used to point at the river and say, the Jamestown fort must have eroded away into the water. Well, if you look at statues for 10 minutes, they kind of just stand there. And I just thought, well, that's it.
Let's go.
Yeah, that's about it. And then 4 years later is when they started doing the archaeology. I've worked here for 11 years. And the more I've started to delve into things like economics, race, religion, land acquisition, corporations, you start thinking about it. The more I started to realize that one of the problems we learned in school is we use these old-fashioned words. They're using in the 17th century, and I just translate them. Virginia Company's a joint stock company. No, it's a corporation. It's SpaceX. That's what SpaceX is doing. If you look at, if we start realizing, okay, it's sort of the same. It's the same capitalism. It's the same social class structure. It's the same church, literally. It's these same power structures. It's about power. And once you start looking at Jamestown critically, you start realizing, wait a minute, this whole 17th century story is still going on.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same. And so this stops being boring, it starts being interesting. But it's like, I want to, these pieces are in the way. It's trying to envision what this place looked like. We're having a nice quiet walk together, but I'm like, we just went down the 5th Avenue of Jamestown. This would have been rich people. That street there would have been hustled, but people were being bought and sold right there.
Wow.
And so whenever I try to write tours, before I ever write a tour, when I first have an idea to do a tour, I usually spend about 3 or 4 weeks walking by myself this time of day to think, And I want to.
This is a beautiful time of the day here.
Plus, you can feel the land.
Gorgeous.
You start feeling the land because you realize, okay, Angela felt the same breeze. Angela saw the same sun. Angela walked on that same grass.
Very same grass.
She heard these birds. But see, you and I, anytime we want to go, we can just go.
Yeah.
That's the difference. This is Alcatraz for her,
Yeah, she couldn't leave.
the prison. And so I started thinking about contrasts between one, how, like the Matrix, how different versions of history occur simultaneously. It's not like one group is lying to the other. It's just as a white American, like my certain world that I'm seeing is one thing. And I have to turn on the switch and say, if I'm somebody else, how's this same story going to play out?
It's all perspective.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
one of the things that taught me this, I remember I went to Richmond, and you know that where the African burial ground is under the
Oh,
interstate?
yes, absolutely.
So I went there.
There's a guy that gives a great African American tour.
Oh, I need to go. Yeah, I just was kind of on
You
my
would have
own.
enjoyed that. Yeah.
I just stood there in the field because I knew who Gabriel was. I remember his story. And they said, well, Gabriel's somewhere out here. He got garroted. And I'm in this field, like, and I know the man doesn't have a statue. He doesn't have a monument. He doesn't have any sign even saying he existed, other than he was strangled to death for what? Not wanting to be a slave. You know what's ironic? Is like if you stand in the spot where Gabriel was probably strangled and you just look up on the hill to the north, you can see St. John's Church, where Patrick Henry said.
Very true.
And I thought of give me liberty, give me death. And I said, well, who got liberty, who got death? And it's like one is a tourist attraction, the other one was going to be raised for a ballpark. And that if you think about why black folks are telling you why people think they don't matter, like that's an example. Like you would never do that to like a white cemetery.
Very true.
If it was white Revolutionary War patriots buried in unmarked graves, there's no way in hell anyone's going to put anything on top of that other than a big monument saying these people are heroes.
You said a lot on one sentence.
Yeah.
Man.
So it's things like that I start thinking about. If I'm this group, if I'm this person, and I'm standing here, and that's why I walk out by myself, like how would I feel? How would I see the same thing if I push this button and I'm somebody else?
What's the story behind the obelisk? We'll put that up.
This was the federal government. In 1907, they bought this land here, because my part of the park I work for is still privately funded, but this was a cornfield at the time. They bought it from the farmer. They put up the obelisk. What you can't see here is there's big giant steps that have been now filled in with dirt. So now it's like a big hill, but there was like these massive, almost like steps. And the symbolism 104 for the 104 English, and it says the birthplace of Virginia and the United States. And I'm sure there's some Masonic.
Most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of that. I get asked that, but I'm sure, especially in that time period, I wouldn't doubt any of that.
Most definitely.
But why the placement there is you see how the ferry boat now is going sideways, diagonal. So that south bank of the ferry is in the same spot. The north bank of the ferry used to be where those benches are right there.
Gotcha.
So you would sail straight across. And so if you think about it, it's like looming even bigger. in
Yeah, I
your
was
mind.
wondering when the sun pops up.
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh, it's
what
something.
it looks like. Yeah, they were definitely trying to say something.
But then what happened is I did look this up in 1916. There was a Black History Committee at Virginia State University, or I don't remember what it's called then, but what it's called Virginia State today. John M. Gandy, he put together a committee to talk about the first Africans in 1619. This is 100 years ago. And my organization said that's not important. Permission denied. And I was looking up too,
Well,
people were
they knew the story then. They always
Oh
knew
yeah,
the truth.
there was a
What's
civil rights-
coming out, now is
Oh,
that
same thing.
they always knew.
There's a civil rights activist named what's his name? Sorry, it's in Richmond. He's a pastor. He's head of the NAACP, and he got kicked out of this park because a black man was not allowed in this park unless they were a chauffeur.
Oh,
for a
get
white
out.
family.
What year was this?
1930. His name was W.L. Ransom.
Well, it still seems to me there's a whole story left to be in the middle of the story about what happened, between the time that they were starving here and the time the first Africans came in,
Oh yeah.
and how they became, I guess, in a way.
I'm trying to figure out what my tour is, because I do different themed tours, and there's one I'm working on that I think would be the transition, which is the Powhatan Uprising of 1622 is the transition, because it's at that point where a lot of the Powhatan will be killed, or will go west. And what is the relationship between Africans and Powhatan descended people? And many of the Powhatan descended people are darker, and some are lighter if they have the Irish ancestry
Right.
too. But there's been a lot of tension between Native Americans who accept those with blacker features and those who don't. That because there's this color line being built, where if you want to keep your reservation, then you got to side with the whites.
Well, it's always been like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Going back to the $5 Indian, but
Yeah.
and that blood is so, I guess, diluted at this point.
Yeah.
You know, it is
Yeah,
what
and
it
if you
is.
pass, you pass. So
Right,
you just let it go.
exactly. And
No, it's tragic, and I think there's a. I realize there's like 100. Like here's another story that we don't.
even the story of Pocahontas, you know, is kind of intriguing to me
Yeah.
because how old was Pocahontas when she was taken?
17.
17. And up to that point, how long as the English? How long were they here? I wonder what
she was
was.
10. She was 10 or 11 when they first knew her. This is 1614, and the same ship that stole Pocahontas stole Angela, the treasurer.
Yeah, and that's her right there.
And that is a 1922 statue where she's seen as a woman in her 20s doing notice how it's an English curtsy.
Exactly. Have they ever done any DNA?
I don't know. Well, I do.
On
Well, what
Pocahontas?
happened is Pocahontas' white descendants of what John Rolfe married into other white people times 10 generations, so they're all like really well to do. But in the case of that statue, I can tell you I've seen this. I found the dedication speech of that statue from 1922.
Get out.
And the lady who actually said the speech said, "We redeemed her and made her lily white."
And I believe that.
They turned her into a European. But
Yeah.
I think all that was either Stockholm syndrome or she was kidnapped. But I don't know.
That's always been intriguing to
And
me.
here's another one we'd mentioned. The first right here, you're on a battlefield, and I can feel it. Like you feel these things.
Yeah.
When the English first got here, they didn't build a fort right away, right? But they had they picked the high ground here, right? And Paspahegh is right beyond the cross, right there in the distance. 2 weeks after the English landed, this is the battlefield where 400 Paspahegh warriors ran up this hill and came this close to wiping out the English colony within an hour. Because the English still had their ships here with the cannons, that's how they shot bar shot into the trees, just exploded the trees on top of the Powhatan.
Wow.
But like this battle is like probably to me one of the like 20 most significant battles in American history. If you define importance, it's the history of the United States.
Absolutely.
Right?
They wipe them out. Maybe we never are.
No.
At least not till much later.
This right here is that battlefield. This is where it happened. Like everything from like the river on this front here, a crescent. And here's the thing, very similar to the Zulu attack of the bullhorns, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Powhatan are doing. They go to the center and they go to the right and left, and they actually have the English encircled. They overran their camp. If they don't have those bar shots for the cannons, this is it, right here. And so, by the way, right after this battle is when they built the fort, and they said they built it in 19 days. And when people ask why they built the fort so quickly, like you never got the backstory. They actually reacted to the Powhatan telling them to take off. And people are like, you're picking on the English, and I'm like, I'm not. Like, go to English history.
You're not picking on anybody.
no,
You're telling the truth.
Well, here's my thing. I'm not even picking on the English, because I'm like, we could say that 800 years ago, Norwegian farmers are looking for an island of opportunity, and they're called Vikings. And when they invaded England, what did the English do? I mean, they fought them, right? To the
Right.
death. They're like, you don't take things from the English people.
Are they still finding? I see these digs here.
Yeah.
Is this the first time that they're digging, or have they been digging before?
This is somewhat new where we're here, because like they're now working more outside the fort, but like they found a well here, and there's been some problems with it, but their wells are really good for lots of artifacts. And then here, we believe we found, I don't have the right folder. There was a part of the Jamestown fort where if you look at the map, it looks like a flag, and we know it's not a flag. We picked it up on radar, so we should find out what that was soon. But it's like coming off here.
Yeah.
And then this is where you have the American Civil War history combined with the Jamestown. So the Confederate Army and the English picked the same place to build a fort.
Now, are we doing any carbon dating on any of the artifacts we're finding?
The oldest thing ever found here that I think could be identified was like 11,000 years ago. But that's so far.
Right.
But I definitely think the human presence in what's now Virginia is at least 12 to 13,000 years ago, if not older.
What did we find at 11,000?
It was
How deep were we? Do you know?
What the James River would have been is a bit of a stream at the time, at the sea level.
Right.
And there would have been more like hunting ground out there in where the river is. and they found like a large like spear point that would have been from an earlier period than what the Palatine are doing at this point.
Metal steel?
Oh no, like a stone. But people who know the culture can tell like the generation is being made based on the skill level of the
Right.
wood knapping and stuff.
That is very interesting.
But 11, I think 12,000 year old is the oldest thing we found. And most of your finding just
What about the pottery? Is it mostly?
you get a lot. You get a global economy. You get the economy back then. You were getting Dutch pottery, some stuff from China. The Chinese stuff is better, but you can tell it's so well made.
Mm-hmm.
It's more expensive. You see stuff from Turkey, the Netherlands is the cheap knockoff stuff. Germany, especially from Hamburg. Some things from Spain, and then of course you start seeing in periods of trade more Native American pottery. You can tell when they're at war and peace based on the amount of artifacts.
Right.
And then you get just whatever they can get their hands on. You get some stuff from Asia, but that's going to be far pricier. And I guess people who are that rich to afford that aren't coming here.
Right.
Most of these people here are new money, if they have money at all.
What did we? They dug where Angela and those folks were?
They did. We don't know where. We think we found where Angela would have lived, where that brick building was that burnt down. It would be right behind there, but we actually were in the wrong place for 2.5 years of our 3-year contract.
What are we using to penetrate the ground? Is it LiDAR? Or?
Yeah, I think so. They're doing that now. We have some of our own stuff now. We used to have to rent it, and the Angela project kind of woke us up into needing to do that, because one of the reasons where we were in the wrong spot was that we didn't realize the road had moved in the 1700s. And once we ran the radar, we found where the original road was and mapped it, checked it with the maps. We're like, oh man, we were on the wrong side of the hill for 2.5 years.
Wow.
But it can be done easily. And then here, this is another like missed opportunity. This is the field where in 1676 Nathaniel Bacon threatened the governor. This was the Capitol building. There was a brick building right there. And there was like 500 angry, drunken dudes on horseback threatening the government right here in 1676.
Sound like something that happened recently.
And when that happened recently, the first thought in my mind was right here when that happened. This is another example, because they were
history repeating itself.
They were pointing guns at the government.
And that's the important thing about telling the real story. That way we could keep history from repeating itself.
It's just, because it's just like my frustration is I watch the news and I'm that annoying guy saying, well, that already happened. And here's why this is happening. But you don't get taken advantage of if you know what's happening.
Exactly.
Why. And I've been trying to tell my kids this. I'm saying, look, you have to, because they're talking, well, one can you tell someone's telling the truth? And I was like, most of the time, a news report's not going to 100% lie. It's just usually there's like 2 or 3 minutes of people going blah, 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 like talking points. And somewhere in the middle of the story, you're going to get the real reason for the story. But you got to listen for it.
These photos always kill me. These illustrations of who the American Indian was always kill me. They always look so weird.
Yeah, and that's John White from Roanoke. And the fact is, they keep using just one artist from 1585. I'm sure he did the best he could for his time, but it's like you can't just use that to say that everybody looked like that.
It's really strange.
I think that's part of the reifying of what you were talking about. If that's burned in our brains, the only way a Palatine can work, even though none of those people are, that guy's not Palatine. He would have been from North Carolina, right? So,
there's this certain calm about this place now. But you imagine back in those days, it probably wasn't that at all.
It was a frightful, I think.
Yeah, I think it would have been, probably would have been wet and soggy.
And also, we're having like one of those early spring days. It's very nice here in the spring and fall. But in July and August, this is a brutal
I would imagine.
place. So many bugs are coming off the roof. They're biting.
I mean, this looks great now. I would imagine it would have been.
Yeah, this is an ideal time to be.
Yeah.
But I have, I do tours in August, and I will tell you, nobody likes this place in August. It's just you can't breathe. It's so sticky, and you got, if you get the wrong kind of breeze or the right kind of breeze, you don't know which bug's going to bite you here or there. And at least I have bug spray and lightweight clothing. But imagine wearing wool clothing and working out in these fields.
I see these folks a lot. The fence erected by the National Society, Daughters of the American Colonists.
Yeah, they're still around.
1925. Wow.
That fence used to be put up to protect the brick church.
and now it's up
So I
here.
moved it here just to put it
I have a
somewhere.
book also going back to the statues in that time period about the Daughters of the Confederacy. Like these folks as well that had a lot to do
Yeah, a
with a
lot
lot
of
of
times
these.
they belong to the same clubs. I mean, because
Right.
if you're a 10th generation white English Virginian,
Mhm.
you pretty much can belong to all those groups.
All those groups, yep.
And
And
there's a lot of them.
the saga continues.
Yeah, and it's
It is so beautiful. Look at that sun.
you got one of the best sunsets in all of Virginia.
Yeah, that is good looking.
All right, this is where I
I appreciate you. It was nice meeting you, sir.
Yeah.
Let me shake your hand. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Is your email on that card?
Yeah, I gave you my email.
Listen, I'd like to come back up whenever you have some time.
Yeah, cool.
It'd probably be a Friday. We could chat it up a little bit.
And if you want to catch this museum, it closes at 5.
Oh, it closes at 5?
Yeah, you got a half hour. But you
Yeah.
can see some of the original artifacts.
I appreciate you.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Well, folks who came to Jamestown, if you like some of this content, I'm trying to find the correct word for it. I don't even know content is the right word for it. This is living history. I love to be able to find folks like Mr. Summers that will speak power, that will speak truth to power, and tells a story as close to the truth as possible. This is 2023. We are still dealing with the same types of situations as we always have. It's a story about the proletariat. It's a story about the haves and the have-nots. It's always been the story. I think over time it's become one of race. But all along it's always been about those that have and those that don't. And those that have, to what lengths they will go to keep it. It's a story as old as humans itself. It's a story as old as human history itself. So what then do we do? What then do we do? Well, all is not lost. I think there are those like me, like Mr. Summers, that are avid readers, that are in search for truth, in search for knowledge. Yes, knowledge. And in doing so, we'll share with those of you that are willing to listen, willing to hear, willing to open up your hearts and minds, willing to give a man a chance based on the content of his character, know what he or she looks like, or what he or she has. But seeing that true human within, this thing we call love, that is so, so hard to find. Virginia Company of London, chartered April 1606, founded Jamestown, and sustained Virginia 1607 to 1624. The large eagle looms over that plaque. And just to tell you folks, all symbology means something. Jamestown in 2023. We've walked these grounds. We've spoken about Angela and other so-called Afrikaans like her. And hopefully, some of you will pick up the mantle, become archaeologists, become the storytellers. That is in us. But put pen to paper, the references for those behind us to find. It is such a story that we need to tell. And our children to hear it. Our children that are melanated, non-melanated, green, yellow, red, what have you. The whole color spectrum that we love so much. This is really the most insignificant thing about us as human beings. So folks, I hope you all come back and see us. It was such a beautiful day. I think it was meant for me to be here today. None of this was planned with Mr. Summers. It was all impromptu. All of it. It's a conversation that was unrehearsed. And I believe as close to the truth as possible. We covered a lot of different areas. And maybe if you all want to hear it, we'll break them down into a small portion. I think Mr. Summers is a truther at heart. If he says something you didn't agree with, please don't even ask the comment, ask the questions intelligently. And I may reach out to him, or I may answer if I know what he answered. But it's all about a conversation, folks. It's a conversation. We were trying to be, we weren't trying to be, we were very respectful to each other. Didn't agree with everything he said, but nothing he said was malicious. It's what he sees as a scholar. So what he sees it, it's his perspective. But a lot of what he said I agree with. A lot of it. There's some things that are somewhere in the middle. There's some things that I would certainly say differently. But nothing he said was malicious. So having said all of that, Mr. Summers was wearing a plaque. He was speaking for himself, not necessarily his employer. So if you all have any issues with anything that he said, just know that he was speaking from his perspective. And I think, again, most of it was great information, things that a lot of you can go and build upon. So questions maybe you may have had either have been answered, or maybe have raised more questions for you. Like I told him, I don't know how much of this I cut out, how much of it I just let run. But it was a great conversation. The type of conversations I think we should all be having at some point in our lives with either a scholar or someone with the knowledge to be able to provide those answers to those questions most of us have had for a long time. So until then, folks, this is Ride to the Sun. I hope to bring you more and more like it. If you like it, share, comment, and subscribe.